Hello, this is Trends. I am Bumi Obano. And as always, Moses Omogena, the digital producer, is right here with me. What's trending, Moses?
Nice one.
Yeah, I got that right. Digital producer.
Yep. It's good to be on the show again. It's the 24th episode. Wow, seems like yesterday.
It's been months.
What's trending?
Yes.
Hashtag ZMAP.
Oh, God.
Which is a first cousin to hashtag Ebola. Yes, well, you know that a few weeks back there was, a supposedly cure for the Ebola EVD virus, but now there's been some awareness and concern raised. Of course, we know that the ZMAP is a biopharmaceutical drug that is still very much in the experimental stage, yeah. So we cannot conveniently say that it is a cure or a vaccine for EVD. But now it's an experimental cure, and this is the first time it's been tested on humans, after the outbreak. So right now, scientists and specialists are saying that, it's still on the going process. So some people that have taken the vaccine or the cure are showing signs of recovery, some are not. So it's a 50-50 chance, and it makes it a very tricky medical condition. The company, the manufacturer of the vaccine are saying that it's been exhausted, which makes people wonder why, because the drug's actually been made from tobacco. So we're not clear when they say exhausted.
Well, I guess
we're not clear if it's from the raw materials or if it's from the bio or chemical process of production. So yeah, that's the concern. But before we end that, there's something I would like to clarify. On my way from work, I noticed two colleagues. One was greeting the other, and he extended a handshake, and the other one gave a very cold shoulder because of the Ebola outbreak.
I don't want Ebola.
I'm sorry, I can't shake you. But I need to say this, that you cannot, the virus, when it gets, even if the Ebola virus touches your skin, you cannot be infected by that. The only way, exactly, the only way you can be a victim to the virus is when it gets in contact with your mucous membrane. Places like the mucous membrane are pinkish, places in the body like your eyes, your nostrils, your ears, your mouth, the urinary tract of the penis, of the vagina, in case of a female. So when it touches your skin, you're like, oh my God, I have Ebola. No, which is the reason why people are being encouraged to wash their hands and sanitize as often as possible.
Because you put your
you put those hands in those places. So we need to know that. We need to get that in track. That no, and of course you were telling me earlier today that one cannot be contagious until they start showing signs. So there are lots of misconceptions about Ebola, but remember, go and do your research to get all the facts right. And you can join the conversation by sharing your views with us via Twitter at TVC Trends. Comment on our Facebook page, facebook.com/TVC Trends, and send your pictures and video comments to at the trends at tvcnews.tv. That was a mouthful. Now, the White House at the recently held U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit appeared to have sent a new signal of commitment to Africa and presumably putting China on high alert that she's not ceding the continent to Beijing in spite of China's tremendous presence on the continent in the last decade. With the new trade ties and security so proposed at the summit, many wonder why the African market is now the fancy of the United States of America. Well, on Trends today, we bring online discussions into the studio, as always. Now, the skepticism and the euphoria tied around this new African development potential. But first, let's have a look at this.
Skeptics will say this summit has taken too long a time coming, and they may be right, especially since the Chinese and other world powers have already set the tone for a new engagement with Africa. But this two-day summit, which sees the United States playing catch-up, is strategic in its timing, coming immediately after a month-long leadership forum for some 500 young Africans.
We have to make sure that we're seizing the extraordinary potential of today's Africa, which is the youngest and fastest growing of the continents.
President Obama had told those youths of Africa why the world will need a strong, prosperous, and self-reliant Africa. The latest outbreak of Ebola in West Africa and the fate of schoolgirls captured by the militant group Boko Haram in Nigeria could have been headlines for the media, but Washington is focused on business and trade dominating the talks. It's an engagement many Africans have asked of the world's richest nation.
And what we've seen is there's been a lot of interest from the likes of China, Japan, the European Union. We've worked very hard to develop close relationships with African leaders. And the United States has perhaps fallen a little bit behind in the race to win African hearts and minds.
Obama's election in 2009 had sent a strong message of hope to the continent, but many say they have been left disappointed, with the American president taking that familiar route of doling out handouts to the continent.
We are calling upon the United States Congress and all that are within the leadership of the United States to relook at their policies concerning Africa and if possible, bend some of the stringent rules that they have against Africa.
Africa should expect less from an American president because, you know, the Cold War period is over. The patronage and then patron-client relationships are no longer as strong as they should be. So we should expect less. Let's do our own thing. Wherever if there's any help or aid that comes in, then it's a bonus to us. But let's put our house in order. Obama has been preaching to us more than doing something for us.
But this reset in relations, though coming this late, is a work in progress for a continent striving to face its future with more determination, and the United States bent on providing its role as a big force in the world.
China has made a significant investment in growing trade with Africa and in growing its opportunities in Africa. The Chinese leaders have hosted a number of African heads of state summits over the last decade, and they have a presence all over the continent. It is still possible for the United States to make up for lost time by strengthening our foreign commercial service, by leadership from our president, such as the upcoming summit, and by engagement by our private sector and our public sector. This summit is a great way to kick off that next step and to re-energize U.S.-Africa engagement.
Now, that report certainly raised quite a number of issues. You know, should we even be relying on investments, opportunities coming from the United States? Should we just, you know, I like the last guy there before
let's put
the
our
other
house
expert. Let's
in
put
order.
our house in order. I really
True.
liked that phrase.
I
well,
agree.
There's a lot to talk about, don't you think?
Exactly.
And joining us to discuss this on the program today, we have Bolaji Ogunsheye. He's an economic policy analyst, and via Skype, we have Christopher Wood. He's a researcher on economic diplomacy with South Africa Institute of International Affairs. Good to have you join us, gentlemen. So, I'll start with this quote. It's a very interesting one, actually, and it's coming from Sudanese billionaire Mo Ibrahim. He was addressing an audience on the U.S. African Leadership Summit, and this is what he said. Okay, he said this: wherever you go in Africa, there are Chinese people, there are Brazilian people. None of us went to Brazil or to India and China to tell them to come and invest in Africa. They find out themselves and they come and invest. Why must we come and inform this, note this, misinformed American business? You guys invented Google, invented all these media platforms. Use it, please. The first time I saw that quote, I had to go back to read it again. I love the last part. You invented Google. Use it. Now, Bolaji, what do you make of this?
Screams distrust there on the part of the U.S. relationship.
Well, I mean, for somebody like me, it's got to set you thinking historically, talking about, you know, cultivate your own garden first, or at least be the first to cultivate your own garden. There was something called the Scramble for Africa, 1886. And that time it was scramble for the physical space. That was a conference, the Berlin Conference. It wasn't on Germany, it wasn't on Europe, it was on Africa. African kings and leaders got together and, European kings and leaders got together and they were discussing what? Africa. This is my bit of it. The land from here to that place is mine. This seafront is mine. this desert part is mine and things. And, you know, instead of going to war, they said, let's sit down and discuss how we
to
share
share this large piece
Africa.
of cake.
Seems to me, if you look at it, right now what you now have is, okay, let's quickly call the Africans together. So we also discuss how much of Africa's growth opportunity. If you look at those expressions, African Growth Opportunity Act, AGWA, right? It's about the opportunities that accrue to the United States from the fact that we are growing.
Okay, but in particular, the court, if there's one word he was throwing out there, misinformed.
Yeah.
So he was saying the American business people are misinformed.
In the sense that they don't know there are a lot of opportunities in Africa, yeah.
Okay.
That's in that sense. But I still have a problem with that. Look, it's simple. Cultivate your own garden first. You know, there's a big conceptual problem with the whole idea of investment in Africa. Our leaders, if we didn't know the meaning of the word, we could have been deceived to believe that the word investment, certainly in Africa, the investor means the outside person who comes to invest. It's ridiculous. The word investor simply means any human being or entity that invests.
All right.
There's nothing stopping that from being Nigerians or Africans investing in their own continent, in their own production,
Let's see what Christopher has to say. Hello, Christopher. I'm sure you have stumbled across the quote and you probably, like me, noted that Mo Ibrahim said this. So what do you make of that?
Well, I think the fact that he used that word misinformed is very important because what this summit was is it was an attempt, at least, or an opportunity to try and change perspective. And I agree with the other guests that investment in Africa has to come from within the continent. But at the same time, if we can, we might as well try and convince some of the outside investors who have lots and lots of money sitting around to come to Africa. And the way to do that is to tell them that this old image that they have of Africa as a war-torn country that just has lots of problems is no longer true. That this is now a continent of opportunity and a continent that they should be looking at for trade and investment first. And I think that's very much the message that our leaders took to Washington and took to the business people within the United States.
Okay, all right.
All right, thank you, Chris. Now, let's take a look at this webpage. And it says, the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, a resounding success exposing American media ignorance of emerging Africa. Yeah, they also have it on the screen. And now, is the African economy truly underreported in the West? Let me ask this to Chris. What do you think?
I think it is to an extent. I think the big story in the West mainly focuses on the rise of Asia. And I think we've even seen that in the focus of the Obama government, that the focus has very much been on Asia as the next region to get involved in. And I think many of the stories that come through the news media in the West are focused on stories like on Boko Haram or Ebola or any of these negative stories. And there really is a lack of focus on just the amount of progress that the continent has made and the growth story that's been created. And that's very different from the likes of China, for example, who really sees Africa, it seems, as an economic partner and also as a source for their resources and what have you, but who see Africa in a very different way. And I think that transformation of opinions and transformation of views hasn't quite reached the American media yet. And it really needs to in order to make sure that we're communicating properly with the American people.
All right, Chris, it's interesting that you say that now. There's been some level of concern so far on social media, between two keywords, helping and interest. Now, I find that very interesting. In the parts of the U.S., it seems to be more of helping. But back here, the Africans seem to see it as more like an American interest, really. Now, take, for example, one of the fact sheets of that summit, presented by Obama, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, it states that to improve infrastructure, to enhance competitiveness and strengthen trade capacity. Now, is the United States willing to live up to these promises even when it may not necessarily favor them? Take, for example, the oil industry, which is very, very crucial in this regard. Now, we know that we sell a crude, today we sold for a barrel of about $108 to the United States. They sell back, this crude in at least five different, petroleum products at almost twice the price. Now, if they help us, for example, to build or construct a world standard refinery where we get to refine our own oil, that means those business opportunities will come to an end. So how do you think the United States might necessarily take that decision in that regard, in terms of interest and helping?
No, you're absolutely right that America is pursuing their own interests. This summit isn't an act of charity or an act of just trying to be nice to Africa. This is America really trying to do two things. Firstly, get access and assure they have access to Africa's resources, which they need in order to keep growing. And also to make sure that, particularly as Africa grows and as the middle class grows, they have access to the African market to sell their goods. So this is very much the US pursuing their own agenda, and it is very much about their interest. But the key thing here is that African states have to make sure that we use their pursuit of their interests to further our own benefits. So if America wants our oil, or if they want access to our markets, we need to say to them that we have other options on the table, that we don't have to work with them. We can also work with the likes of China or the European Union. And if America wants to work with us, they need to bring something to the table. And I think that is to an extent what's happened. We've seen that African leaders are pushing for Power Africa, for example, to try and expand African electrical infrastructure, or pushing for a renewal of the African Growth and Opportunity Act. This is us using America's interest for our own opportunities. And that's really the model that we need to keep pursuing.
All right.
Okay.
You were nodding.
Wait, aside that, there's something he said, we should know that we also have bargaining power too. If America isn't giving us what we want, we can go to China, we can go to... But I read this very interesting article earlier in the day, and the writer was saying that with Africa, being called the rising economy, growth in Africa, but this growth is being overstated. So is Africa, China is coming, wanting Africa. We just had the summit. Africa feels like, oh my God, I'm just really important.
Most wanted.
So, exactly. Don't you think it will give Africa a bloated image of the African economy?
Well, you see, to be honest, I'm generally slightly uncomfortable with this, the nature of this conversation, and if you like, the anchoring logic. I mean, the anchoring logic is that for Africa to develop, maybe history has shifted, because look, I'm not aware that when America was developing, or even more recent one, the third wave, the so-called third wave, including Singapore, you might call Singapore a fourth wave. I'm not aware that they did it by, looking for competition. Okay, who is competing for me, and how can I, position myself to take advantage of them? It's good to take advantage of the outsider who is coming to your country to seek their interests. But for me, these are secondary anchors. The primary anchor for us is to realize that we have to build in-country capacity for industrialization, economic modernization, science, technology, technical know-how, okay? And most of all, to let the educational system must be geared towards making us make the shift. And I've not heard that in all this conversation. The shift from a pre-industrial status to an industrial status. South Africa is a special case. South Africa is a semi-industrial society, okay? And if you look at it, the capacity that brought them there was largely internal, okay? By, in the apartheid age, it was by the white community, and that was a good thing. And you can see the effect now. So what I'm saying is the conversation for me is not fundamental.
So
like you said, Americans are looking for their own interests here. The Chinese are here already building their own interests. Now, where is the African interest? And in any case, in many ways, historically, maybe South Africans will not be very familiar with this, but historically, it may even in some senses be a step backward. We've always had everybody being interested in Africa anyway, or underreporting opportunities. We've always got bad press in the advanced world. But in the 70s and especially the 80s, and maybe up till the mid-90s, African leaders, African technocrats in the multilateral and bilateral systems were introducing things like APA, APPAR, African, some, you know, but this was about letting Africa tap into its own potentials, into its own resources, developing in-country, in-region, in-continent capacity to begin to transform our economies and to make that journey from a pre-industrial status, which most of the continent is now, to either a semi and certainly an industrial status. We still need to face that challenge. We had the AFSAP, Africa, you know, when there was structural adjustment program, African countries, African economies wrote their own version, the African SAP.
And what happened to that?
Then we had NEPAD. All of these things have not gone very far, and that is the challenge. We must dream our own dreams about how to become producers for the world, to be competitive in the international system. The way forward cannot be that, oh, we want to make ourselves more attractive to China or to the US or to the European Union. And in many ways, that is what it is. When AGOA was first introduced, it was clear. The economic analysts across Africa saw that AGOA, in some ways, strategically, was a rival to the Lomé Accord, which was the European Union's own version of trying to build on the historical advantage that they have with Africa, having colonized Africa. All the Francophone countries, their economies, the foundation has been set by the French. Nigeria, all the Anglophone countries, set by the British. So the Europeans saw that opportunity. They have an automatic edge over US. US is geographically too far from Africa, okay? And so is Asia and everything. So when AGOA came in, it was clear to some of us that this was America's answer to the Lomé Accord.
Talking about AGOA, let me bring Christopher into the conversation, because I know you have written a lot about AGOA and the benefits on both sides. So help us understand now. The point of AGOA, according to, well, the script, is to make trade dealings easier for Africa and the United States. So Africa will not, it's duty-free, so subsidized trade dealings. Now, how successful has the African Growth and Opportunity Act been in the last 13 years, especially for Africa?
Honestly, it hasn't been too successful. You have seen increases in the amount of trade with the United States, but most of that has been driven by this old pattern of Africa sending things like oil and other types of commodities to the US. So AGOA, in its principles, is a good thing. It's good because, firstly, we don't have to pay anything or give any concessions in order to get AGOA. It's just completely unilateral from the United States. And it's also good because it gives our products a slight competitive edge over other countries that are sending goods to the United States, such as China or India, or whatever it might be. But I think the important thing with AGOA is really actually what the other guest was talking about, is that really there is a need to make sure that there's organic African development and organic industrial growth within the continent. Now, AGOA is an opportunity that if we have that industrial development, we would then be able to send our goods with a slight competitive edge to the United States. But first of all, there has to be investment in the types of infrastructure and the types of industries that allow us to produce the goods that the United States wants, and that creates the jobs that we want in our countries. So I think there has been some examples of that, particularly in the South African case, which is a bit of an exception, in that there's been big industrial support for building the automotives industry, the car industry, and that's been very successful in sending parts and finished cars to the US through AGOA. So really, it's about a mix. AGOA is there, and it's something that we can take advantage of, but in order to do that, there has to be changes within our own countries and investment within our own industries first.
All right, thank you, Chris. Bolaji, let me throw this to you. Now, we know that the 2015 elections is fast approaching, and now America has, made a resolution to invest $51 million over the next 5 years, specifically in Nigeria for our elections. Now, do you wonder why, America might be so interested in our, electoral process and how we choose our leaders? Bearing in mind that, in fact, I saw a comment online and it says, "He who pays the piper dictates the tune." So, do you ever wonder why they suddenly want to show so much interest in our electoral process.
Why now?
Why now, exactly? Why now? Someone who was saying the other day that this is what I would call a modern-day dictatorship. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they've always done, actually. I mean, America, Europe, they've always wanted this a democratically stable African things. But I think the more strategic interest is this whole correlation that is made between democratic societies or democratically stable societies, well, in the minds of a lot of people, almost automatically tends to generate economic growth. Good economic growth, I hope, right? In other words, if it's democratic, you can hold leadership to account. People get kicked off after every 4 years if they don't perform and things. But that is the theory. In practice, we know that is slightly different. But I might say that their interest there might be, and it's very likely to be, an overarching strategic worldview that, look, if we can help Africa to stabilize the evolution of its democratic journey, then we are likely to have more stable economic processes and things within those countries, which then give them good opportunities to. And I have no objections at all to countries trading with each other and taking advantage of that trade. If I can outcompete you, that is absolutely healthy. It's just that one of the parties must not be in a position where, I mean, like in the case of many African countries, certainly Nigeria, everything we said to the international market is raw this one, crude that one. You know, it's all about raw and crude and this and that. We want to see more finished products of international standards going out, because that makes us wealthy here. It creates jobs, it creates high skills pools, it creates capacity, technical and scientific capacity. It pushes research and development, and on, okay? And all of that washes back to our educational system.
Okay. Christopher, I know that we've all agreed here that the way forward is for Africa to develop Africa itself and, you know, get help from the international community, but the main focus should be on developing African help. But you followed the summit closely, and if there's one thing I want to know is, at the end of the day, what tangible plan of action do you think came out of that summit? So was it all talk? I know they're throwing words like $14 billion, but what tangible plan of action actually came out from that summit?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with, or the restraint on the American summit is that it was basically a summit between African leaders and the president of the United States. And the president doesn't have that much authority to really enact spending, for example, or big infrastructure projects. So when African leaders meet with China, for example, they can pledge as a government to build a road or build a dam. But the president, if Obama tried to do that, Congress would basically stop him from doing so. So that limited what outputs could really come out of it. And what we saw was with those investment pledges, for example, that was really about the private sector looking to invest in Africa, not necessarily the government, although a small portion was from the government. But I think there were some positive signs. There was firstly that there was that connection made between the American private sector, who has now stated that they're willing to invest all that money within Africa, which is always good. And then the other thing is that there was a very firm commitment made by everyone to have a renewal of AGOA that is speedy and that happens for an extended period. Because AGOA expires in October next year. And if it expires, it's going to put a lot of trade, particularly for smaller countries, at risk. So it really needs to be renewed, and it needs to be renewed quite fast. And there was at least very clear talk at this level now that AGOA is going to be renewed. But at the end of the day, the real action is going to come with Congress, and that's not who the meeting was with. So we still have to wait and see what's going to happen.
Okay, and while we wait and see, let's go on a break now, and when we come back, we'll continue talking.
It all begins here in TVC Newsroom, the pinnacle of news gathering to tell the African story. Our comprehensive and in-depth research that affect you and give voice to the voiceless. Fast, interactive, true, and important news you can use. First to be heard on Africa's premium news channel, TVC News through African Eyes.
This is TVC News. I'm Air Haraz. I am Bukola Samuel.
It's 20 years since the genocide in Rwanda, and tonight here at King's College in London, there is time for a number of those
Welcome back. You're still watching Trends, and we are discussing the recently held African Leaders Summit in Washington. Now, we ended with Christopher, and we're starting with him. So what should African countries do to maximize this new relationship? So you established that a relationship has, been created or strengthened. How can we maximize this new relationship?
Well, I think there's a number of different ways. So the first is to take advantage of existing programs and really to improve on the way we've used the current relationship. So that's on two pillars, really. It's on Power Africa, which really means taking a lot more use of the funds that are available and speeding up our electrical development. And then the big way that we can take advantage is through AGOA. I think we've spoken about it quite a lot now. But it is a great opportunity, even if it isn't something that's being properly utilized right now. So you really need to make a concerted effort to make sure that our exporters and our manufacturers can gain access to the US market. And that's partly about our own industrial strategies and our own development strategies. But it's also about giving them information, for example, about what is needed to gain access to the US market. What red tape and forms do they need to fill in? What support do they need? Do they need finance to maybe pay for shipping to the United States? So it's about supporting our companies in allowing them to gain access to that. And then it's just about keeping the discussion going and making sure that we're always considering all our options out there for each of the decisions we're taking. Keep putting pressure on the United States to make sure that their relationship stays strong with us and stays on par, at least, with China and the EU.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Bolaji, earlier on, before we went on break, you actually made mention of Nigeria's relationship with China and Africa's relationship with China and the United States. Now, do you think that, the United States can actually catch up, with, China's involvement in Africa compared to the 3.4% as opposed to America's less than 1% involvement in terms of, quantity and impact, really? What are your thoughts? How can they measure up?
Well, it depends. The American political system doesn't work in a way that allows the government to just go and bulldoze their way. It's constrained a lot more by laws, by ways of working, by, the balance of power system in the U.S., the Congress. The American president is very heavily subject to the actions of the U.S. Congress, okay? So, and like you said, like Chris said, the American president does not have half as much of the power that the Chinese government has to make things happen, either at home and abroad. Or abroad. There's this joke about some people who went on tourism to China, and this municipal executive, tells them, look, this place, this slum, about 10 million people, in 2 years' time, it will be this housing estate and this shopping mall and everything. And you come back in 2 years, it's exactly that. In the US, you couldn't do that. You have to deal with the local community, the people who are fighting about the environment, whether they want it or whether they want this train to pass. So it's a different kind of thing. The US is not likely to be able to sort of catch up with the Chinese momentum right now. Also because the Chinese tend to sort of put up a lot of money up front, by way of loan, by way of soft participation in investments and stuff. But it's because they're taking a longer term view. They want a China-Africa, 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years down the line. They want the core of African economies to be so dependent on their technologies, on their services, you understand? And that is where, for me, it gets tacky.
That's not good for us.
We should really, we should organize ourselves. The organizing principles for our national development, for our policy, should be such that we are the game makers and the playmakers at the core of our development dynamics.
All right, Chris, I'm sure you would want to react to that. You know, do you think that Americans will be able to catch up relative to China's involvement in Africa?
No, I really don't. Particularly in investment, I don't think they'll catch up with China. China just really seems committed to having this idea that they're going to build infrastructure, they're going to take their companies into the continent, they're really going to have a big push on Africa. And as much as the United States has this conference and they're trying to say that they care a lot about the continent, they're not going to be able to compete on the same scale as China. But there is one area, I think, where the United States might be a better partner or a closer partner in the future, and that is on trade. Because China, as much as it buys a lot from Africa, it's mainly just buying commodities, raw materials, energy, those types of products that perhaps don't add a lot of value for the continent. And I don't see that changing in the near future because China is just so competitive and so good at producing manufactured goods that it's going to be difficult for our manufacturers to easily gain access to the Chinese market. But the United States is slightly different. If anything, oil is becoming less important to the United States because they now have large oil reserves of their own. But their manufacturing sectors, and particularly their labor-intensive manufacturing, is relatively weak. It's no longer at the front of the world. It's no longer what their economy is about. So if there's a market that we can be competitive in manufactured goods, it's probably in the United States. So we can develop the trade relationship, then perhaps at least on that small aspect, we can have a very productive relationship, and perhaps one that's even better than China.
Okay, Chris, one of the strong criticism online is why is this coming at the president's 6th year, now talking about Obama in office, and not perhaps his second of the first term he was in office. So why do you think, what's so important about this season?
Well, I think it's two things. The first is that once an American president gets into a second term, he normally feels comfortable to pursue things that he's passionate about, but that perhaps don't win him any votes. So there's not a big domestic vote constituency in the United States that supports investing in African development. But President Obama, of course, doesn't need to win votes anymore. He's had his elections, so he can focus on those projects he cares about. But I also think a very big part is that his foreign policy thus far has been very focused on Asia. His entire basis of his foreign policy has been called the Asia pivot, where he really tries to make sure that America has a big role to play in that region. But I think what America has increasingly found is that it's very difficult to be competitive in China's backyard. And to try and be very successful in a difficult Asian region is very challenging. So they're almost turning to Africa as a backup plan in case that Asian pivot wasn't successful.
All right, Chris. You know, it's interesting when you made mention of America's strong point in the issue of trade. You know, and some other people also argue that one of the strong points is through the youths, the young Africans. America lately have shown very strong, you know, presence in, you know, among the African youths. Take, for example, through the YALI chats, you know, the Young African Leadership Initiative, where they get to, you know, choose about 500 African youths, take them to the United States, professionally and financially train them, and even offer them career opportunities. Now, some people argue that that's a new and a complex way of brain drain. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a nice initiative, as you say, so long as the leaders are coming back to Africa and coming back to the continent. I do think that's more and more likely. I think you're increasingly seeing people who even are educated in the United States or in Europe coming back to Africa because there are opportunities here again. But I really think as much as it's nice that America is talking about investing in African youth, if they want to do it, they have to do it on a much bigger scale, and they have to do it within the African continent. You know, we can't just talk about sending 500 young people to America. That's great, but what happens to the rest of the youth on the continent? And really, I think if America wants to use their resources to develop African education and help the youth, then they need to be investing in our education system. They need to be coming up with programs to perhaps send American teachers to the continent. something like that that's really going to help people at home, because that's what's going to make the difference in the future.
Okay. Balaji, if Africa is going to benefit from any sort of relationship with China or even the US, what are those important things what are those things that need to be done by the African continent?
I think that Africa just has to up its game, literally, raise its game, so that it's a more, if you like, mutually reinforcing relationship. Do you understand? It doesn't help you very much if you are in a relationship with somebody who is vastly superior to you in virtually all aspects, especially when this other party also dominates your environment in terms of psychologically, culturally. Okay, I mean, if you look at it now, we have what we call the global village, right? Culturally, okay, technically and all of that. But if you look at it, a lot of it is unidirectional, okay? Well, I have seen a lot of our youth here, you know, the where I love New York, I love California. I'm not very sure that when I'm in the US, I see a lot of the typical American, not the African there. I love Djibouti or I love Kano. No. But this is a serious point.
Yes.
If you really look at what we call globalization, the youth culture and everything, it's likely unidirectional. It's moving from only one direction towards the other. It is the Nigerian kids who know a lot about the, you know, Jay-Z and all this one and Beyonce and everything. I doubt, apart from the African kids there, I doubt that the average white American kid or even African American kid or the Asian American actually knows what do you call it, Banji, you know, Banji and all this, and
okay, the African
Two-Face and everything.
Yeah.
So it's the way you can make a relationship bi-directional. Do you understand? I take from you, you take from me. We respect each other. We gain equal gain. Do you understand? Is really for the weaker party to seek to use any existing relationship in such a way that A, helps you to optimize your capacity. And I hope all of that will happen in AGO. I rather doubt, because it hasn't happened with the Lomé Convention of the EU, the ACP, you know, African, Caribbean, and the Pacific. There have been all this. Look, there's nothing new about AGO. AGOA is a continuation of the trend that underdeveloped African countries have had with the developed countries. But it's not a bad thing by definition that we have these relationships, as Chris has said. It's how we see our space, our place, and our role in this relationship.
I'm sorry to cut you. My online communities, I'm sorry, but they feel left out right now. I just have to say a few words of what you're saying. Now, very first comes from CGD, and it says, only 2 journalists asked questions about Africa during Barack Obama's final #Africa Summit press conference. That's terrible. And Okekaz says, why now? One head of state orders 54 heads of state, and they all go running. $34 billion in aid will not go around $1 billion for each country. And as Zainab says, my commentary on the recently concluded African Summit, Obama's African Summit, too little, too late. And Chris Kirubi says, we don't eat politics, we can only eat from economic activities. Yeah, you earlier on trashed that. And Khan says, we live according to generalized image repertoire. African Summit has reset Kenya's US relationship.
Okay, and on that note, now considering the economic policies of some African countries, what future lies ahead for Africa? Now, Chris, I would like you to answer that quickly.
Well, I think the skepticism that's coming through from our online friends really shows the challenge that America has. They have fallen behind the likes of China in investment. They've fallen behind the likes of the EU in terms of the relationship. And now's the time for them to work hard. They have incentives, they have things that they want, but so long as we meet them strongly and say that they're not going to get the things they want without us getting something in return, then we can make this a mutually beneficial relationship. But the key actor there is really African states. We have to be the ones who are going to the table and saying what we need to develop. And that's really what's going to make or break the future of this relationship.
Okay, and at that point, I thank both of you for being a part of the show.
Thank
you
you
made
so
it
much.
very interesting. So thank you,
for coming,
Chris, and thank you, Bolaji, and thank you, the viewers, for watching the program today. Remember that the conversation might end at the studio now, but it continues online. So let's get back there, tweeting and sending Facebook messages. We'd love to hear from you. Goodbye for now.